There is a potential problem at McLaren which could have a lot of consequences further down the line. Last year, McLaren finally won a championship after years and years of pain and misery. They also could have won a Drivers' Championship if a few things didn't happen. You could also argue McLaren currently have the best driver lineup on the grid in Oscar Piastri and Lando Norris. But that's the problem. Keep watching and subscribe to the channel to find out why. McLaren have not won a Drivers' Championship since 2008, after one of the best finishes to an F1 season ever when Hamilton passed Timo Glock on the final corner on the last lap of the last corner of the season to win the championship.
Is that Glock? Is that Glock going slowly?
It is!
That's
It's Glock! Oh my goodness me! Hamilton's back in position again!
Lewis then left McLaren in 2012, and up until 2019 things were really bad for McLaren. They experimented with Honda engines, which turned out to be a complete disaster for McLaren anyway, maybe not other teams. They turned Fernando Alonso into a very miserable man and only got one podium, not even a win, one podium between 2013 and 2019. Finally though, in 2019, things got better for McLaren. Lando Norris came in and Carlos Sainz. Lando rapidly became one of F1's best drivers, while Sainz left the team at the end of 2020 for Ferrari, then in came Daniel Ricciardo. And apart from one win at Monza, Ricciardo's stint at McLaren was awful. In fact, it was that awful McLaren literally paid Ricciardo to leave the team at the end of 2022. And this is what sparked an upcoming problem McLaren may face in the future. Because who did they use to replace Ricciardo? Oscar Piastri, who is already one of F1's next big stars and has already got multiple race wins and podiums in just 2 seasons. Lando has also proven to be very exceptional after getting wins in Miami, Singapore and Zandvoort. Both Piastri and Lando showed in 2024 that they are championship material drivers, giving McLaren a big problem, and that problem is who will be their number 1 driver. Now on paper you would say, oh easy, Lando Norris. He's the most experienced and has outperformed Oscar Piastri in the last 2 seasons. However, Piastri is only going to improve more and more. I'm not saying Lando won't either before Lando fans come at me in the comments, but I do think Piastri has more potential than Lando. There were races last season where Oscar already looked like he'd been in F1 for over 10 years. For example, Baku, the way he was able to hold off Leclerc for most of that race was just exceptional, and only exceptional drivers would be able to do that. He held Leclerc off for that long and did it that well that Leclerc's tyres actually went dead towards the end and Leclerc had to drop off. Only exceptional drivers are able to do that. I know there are many drivers on the current F1 grid who, if they were in that same situation as Oscar Piastri in Baku, they would not have won that race. Also, Piastri's manager is no other than Mark Webber, former Red Bull number 2 driver to Sebastian Vettel. As Webber knows what it's like to be a number 2 driver, he is not going to want that to happen to Oscar Piastri. However, we all know Lando's not going to want to play second fiddle either. For those who watched my Hamilton video about him going to Ferrari, subscribe to the channel by the way if you haven't watched that. And you might have figured out by now that McLaren have a similar problem to what Ferrari currently have. None of their drivers want to be a second driver, because they are both exceptional drivers and should not be number 2 drivers. We saw in Hungary last season where Lando would not give up his position back to Oscar, and it was starting to cause some friction within the team. By the way, this might be controversial, but I don't think Lando should have gave the position up, because at the time he was trying to close the gap to Verstappen in the championship, who at the same time was having an awful weekend in Hungary, and Lando needed every point he could get. Yes, that would not have been fair on Piastri at all, but since when has F1 ever been fair? Now imagine the same scenario as Hungary last season, whether it's Lando trying to steal a race win or Piastri trying to steal a race win. But this time, both drivers are in a championship fight. Not only between themselves, but other drivers as well. I don't think this time any driver would want to give up that position. Like I said, when you're in a championship fight, you want to get every single point you can get. Points are like drugs to F1 drivers. They're highly addictive, you can't get enough of them, and they make you do stupid things like pitting on the last lap to get fastest lap point. Not saying I do drugs by the way, that was just an analogy. Okay, maybe that was a bit of a weird analogy, but you get what I'm trying to say. Also, Piastri is not scared to take a position away from Lando. Look at the start of Monza last season, where Piastri pulled off one of the moves of the season and went round the outside of Lando at turn 4, further causing Lando to lose position to Leclerc, which probably cost McLaren the whole race in general. Yes, towards the end of last season we saw Oscar and Lando helping each other out in the sprint races, when in Sao Paulo Oscar gave up his sprint race win for Lando to win it, but then when Lando realised he wasn't quite ready to beat Verstappen, he returned the favour in Qatar. Yes, it's good they did this, but it was in a sprint race. The difference between 2 positions in a sprint race is only 1 point. And I don't think either driver would willingly give up a win in a natural race. Yes, Lando did it in Hungary last season, but notice the word willingly. So we know that there is potential for things to go wrong between Oscar and Lando. I hope it doesn't, but I can see it happening. Piastri is an exceptional driver and, in my opinion, a future world champion. Lando is also one of the best on the current F1 grid and also has potential to be a future world champion. And in F1, we've never seen teammates get along when they're both in a championship winning car and they're both championship material. For example, Hamilton Rosberg, Verstappen Ricciardo, and who could forget Prost versus Senna. This is going to happen at McLaren as well, and I don't think there's that much the team can do to avoid it. It's good to see McLaren back at the top in F1 because it's been way too long, but they need to make sure they stay on top of things between Lando and Oscar, because at the moment that relationship is going really well and they don't want it to sour. Let me know your thoughts on this in the comments. If something was to happen between Lando and Oscar and they both crashed out of the same race in a potential championship fight, what do you think happens next? Does Oscar or even Lando start to look at a drive elsewhere? Maybe even McLaren start looking at getting rid of one of them and bringing in a solid second driver like Bottas was at Mercedes? Let me know your thoughts on that. And if you want to argue about any other future F1 debates, subscribe to the channel. Hopefully, McLaren do manage to keep on top of things between Lando and Oscar and keep that relationship plain sailing. And just to clarify, I am not saying that Lando and Oscar hate each other. In fact, I think they get on really well. I'm just raising the point about what could potentially happen if they were to both find themselves in a championship fight, which I feel could definitely happen. All that needs to change is for McLaren to stop making costly mistakes, Lando to learn how to keep a lead into turn 1, and for Piastri just to be a little bit more consistent. Subscribe to the channel so you can keep up to date with all the latest F1 news and discussions. As always, thank you so much for watching, I really appreciate it, and I'll see you all in the next one.